All right, let's get right into it. If you're prepping for exams on the Indian Constitution, you know there are a handful of British acts that are absolutely foundational. Getting them mixed up is not an option. So in this session, we're going to blitz through the 5 most important acts, lock them down, and give you the tools you need to ace that section.
Does your head start spinning trying to keep the 1773 Act straight from the 1935 one? Yeah, you're not alone. It's a lot to juggle. But don't worry. In the next few minutes, we're going to make it all crystal clear. We'll give you a simple framework and some really easy memory tricks to keep everything straight.
So here's our game plan. We're going to walk through these 5 major acts, one by one, in order. We'll start at the very beginning with the first real attempt at central control, and we'll end with the act that basically became the blueprint for India's own constitution. Let's do this.
Okay, first up, the Regulating Act of 1773. You have to understand, before this, the East India Company was kind of running wild with a ton of autonomy. This act, it was a total game changer. It was the moment the British Parliament stepped in, put the company on a leash, and really began that long process of centralizing power over India.
So, what did it actually do? Well, 4 big things you need to remember. First, it created the super powerful role of Governor General of Bengal. Warren Hastings was the first guy. Second, it centralized power by making Madras and Bombay report to Bengal. Third, it set up a Supreme Court in Calcutta, adding a whole new layer of legal oversight. And finally, it tried to clamp down on corruption by telling company officials, hey, no more private trading on the side.
Need an easy way to lock this in for your exam? Just remember the word case. C is for centralized administration. A is for the apex court they established. S is for stopping servants' private trade. And E is for the new Executive Council. Just build a case for the 1773 Act, and you've got it down. All right, let's jump forward almost a century to 1858. The trigger for this one was massive, the Revolt of 1857. The British government was completely shaken and decided the East India Company's rule was over. Period. This act represents the single biggest power shift in the entire history of British India. And the change was total. Before this act, India was run by a private corporation. I mean, think about that. After 1858, it was ruled directly by the British Crown. The takeaway is simple. The company was out and the Queen was in.
So what did the new setup look like? The Governor General got a new title, Viceroy of India, who is the Crown's personal representative. Lord Canning was the first. A brand new, powerful job was created back in London, the Secretary of State for India. And to make the takeover complete, the company's old governing boards were just gone, wiped out.
And the mnemonic for this one? Just think Crow. C for Crown rule being established. R for responsibility shifting to the new Secretary of State. O for the office of the Viceroy. And W for wiping out the company's old boards. Easy?
Okay, on to 1909. This is where we see the next big step in the story. These are called the Morley-Minto Reforms, and they're crucial because for the very first time, they cracked open the door, just a tiny bit, to electoral politics in India.
This act brought some huge changes. For the first time ever, it allowed for direct elections for some seats. The main legislative council got a massive upgrade, jumping from just 16 members to 60. But here's the most controversial part. It brought in the idea of separate electorates for Muslims, a move with massive long-term consequences. It also hit a symbolic milestone. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the very first Indian to be appointed to the Viceroy's Executive Council.
So how do you remember all that? Simple. Think of Indian finally getting a seat at the table. S for the controversial separate electorates. E for the Executive Council getting its first Indian. A for the additional members in the council. And T for how the council was transformed into the Imperial Legislative Council.
Next up, the Government of India Act of 1919, also known as the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms. If there is one word you need to associate with this act, it's diarchy. This was a new and honestly pretty complicated experiment in dual government.
So how did this diarchy thing work? Well, at the provincial level, they split all the government subjects into 2 lists. The reserve subjects, the important stuff like finance and police, stayed with the governor. But the transferred subjects, like education and health, were handed over to Indian ministers. This act also created a 2-house legislature at the center for the first time. You can think of it as the great-grandfather of today's Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. And it expanded voting rights, but let's be real, it was still only to about 10% of the population. The mnemonic for this? Well, it couldn't be more perfect. It's dual. D for diarchy in the provinces, U for the upper and lower houses at the center,
A for administrative subjects getting separated, and L for the limited franchise that was extended. And now we get to the big one, the heavyweight champion, the Government of India Act of 1935. This thing was a beast, the longest act the British Parliament had ever passed. It was so detailed and comprehensive that it literally became the blueprint for huge chunks of the Constitution of independent India.
So what did this monster act do? It laid out a plan for an all-India federation. It also admitted that diarchy in the provinces was a mess, so it scrapped it and gave the provinces more autonomy. But then it turned around and tried to introduce diarchy at the central level. And crucially, it established core institutions we still have today, like the Reserve Bank of India and a federal court. And this right here is a huge deal. A core feature of the 1935 Act was this clear division of powers. It created 3 separate lists: a federal list for the center, a provincial list for the provinces, and a concurrent list for stuff they could both work on. If that sounds familiar, it should. This exact 3-list structure was lifted almost directly into the Constitution of India.
And our final memory trick for today is fact. F for the proposed federal structure, A for the new autonomy given to the provinces, C for the 3 lists, concurrent, federal, and provincial, and T for the 3 key institutional changes, including the creation of the RBI and federal court. So let's just do a quick flyby of the journey we've taken. We started in 1773 when centralization began. Then in 1858, the Crown took direct control. In 1909, we saw the first limited elections. 1919 brought the experiment of dual governance. And it all led up to 1935 with the final federal blueprint. You can see how each act was a critical step, building on the last one.
And that brings us to a final thought to chew on. These 5 acts, without a doubt, built the skeleton of the modern Indian state, its administration, its legislature. But the bigger question is, how much of that colonial DNA still runs through the veins of India's governance today? From the way Parliament works to the structure of the civil services. Something to think about. All right, that's it for me. Good luck with your exams.